So I suppose we just give a bit of background on ourselves. And this might look familiar. This is a presentation. This is an open presentation that just talks about our first project that we did. So MidasSpaces is, I suppose officially speaking, it's myself, Alan, and Ian, who's not here today. And we basically work with other people, such as Curran here, who is a specialist in projection mapping.
Yep.
And what else?
Motion graphics.
Motion graphics. And Cindy, who has started working with us since February this year. And she worked on the latest project. So basically, myself and Ian met in college. We were doing masters out in DCU, and the first project that we did kind of came out of that, just kind of collaboration together. So we worked with a dancer, Tom O'Donnell, and basically built the first kind of version of this that you'll see what it kind of became eventually, for him to just kind of improvise with, to come up with some music. So I'll just show you a bit of what we did with that. Have you got anything? I'm just going to, this is just a short video, but just to kind of give you context of where we came from, and then kind of we want to talk more about where it went beyond that. So that was basically the first project that we did, and I suppose it was a big learning kind of experience for us as well as stuff we hadn't done before. So a lot of different ideas going on there, and from there basically we always wanted to kind of develop the show. That was like a 15-minute performance, so we wanted to develop like a full-length performance and kind of introduce more elements, some of which we've been successful at doing and some we haven't gotten to yet, in terms of like audio reactivity or just kind of more control for the dancer, or stuff that hopefully we can talk about more about, like handing over more control to the computer, and just allowing that to sort of interact with performers. So I mean, what's kind of interesting is from there we had the opportunity to develop a full-length show for Fringe Festival, which was in 2012. The original one was in 2011, and so the following year we developed a full-length show for Fringe, and just in terms of the direction it went, really down to kind of being tied in terms of resources not having anywhere really to rehearse and stuff like that, everyone worked very independently. So Alan, who would look after most of the code at this stage, was kind of like coding away on the interactive elements and the generative visuals. Then I was like writing music for it separately, giving it to dancers. They were choreographing in a dance studio, and then we're kind of all coming together at the end, and we had like one day to bring everything together. I mean, we weren't entirely happy with how it turned out. You know, it was fine. It was what it was, and everyone did work really hard on it. But just in terms of what we were really trying to do, in terms of like creating interactive environments and that, it just kind of fell short, because we didn't really have, I suppose, the space to work in for everyone to kind of come together to collaborate, and for the dancers to really work with the technology and to let them inform one another. So that was really what we wanted to get to, which is where the direction we're headed then when we started working with Cindy. That was kind of what we were talking about doing with you. And if you want to jump in here, you can.
Yeah, yes, just that from the experience previous to working with these guys that I had just that very precious thing called time to go in and experiment with the conceptual ideas and the actual coding, and to give the piece, the third version really, to give the piece the time it takes to really experiment with the dancers, but also to teach the dancers how to work with the technology. Because it's a bit like, just because you can dance doesn't mean you can perform. So just because you can dance doesn't mean you automatically know how to work with or respond to working with technology. So there's those sorts of layers of things. And
it kind of works two ways as well, in terms of the technology, needing to be tweaked to, read the dancers right, read their movements right, and really goes back and forth.
Yeah, but I've been lucky enough this last year to have a residency in the School of Science in UCD, and then access to studio space on campus. And so what we did, we had loads of meetings for months about the kind of concepts and how we would build a structure for the piece. But then based on that, I went off with the dancers and built up like a bank of choreography, a bank of ideas based on the concepts that we could then, once we were actually in these different environments, I could say, try this, try that, try that. So we had kind of a call sheet almost of ideas that we could draw from, and then refine it at the same time that the technology was being refined. So it was this dialogue back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all the time, which was brilliant. And of course, like sometimes asking questions that couldn't be answered in one day or even 1 week, and needed a lot of time to code. And so then, because of the way the piece was built, we could just switch and work on another section of the piece. So it was just constantly sort of strategizing about how to use our time, the limited amount of time that we had, either in just a rehearsal studio or in the theatre when we got to work in the theatre, how we could use that the best with all of these people's needs. So it was, we just had to be really alive to that. And really,
it was a massive learning experience in that way, and stressful. But everybody kept their cool and held it together. And
speak for yourself.
Yeah, well.
But that's allowed. You guys are very patient with my infrequent explosions. But
Yeah, well, it was infrequent. At least we still talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think as well, like just having the time to work through the process as well, and just sort of like develop a way of working with this technology, it really added a lot to the piece. And like definitely, like the first time around, it was creative in the sense that we kind of didn't quite know what we were doing, and we're sort of just trying out lots of things and seeing what worked and what fit. And then sort of the second time around, it sort of felt a bit like we were just being technicians and we were just sort of like pre-programming everything, just stuff that happened. Whereas this kind of really got us back on track in terms of working on concepts and sort of developing things, and it just sort of felt like like it was about something, you know. I don't know, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, you started
Yeah.
from a different place.
Yeah.
Where this time we started by meeting and just meeting in the coffee shops and getting our ideas together.
Yeah. Storyboarding, I'll go through the storyboards with you at some point, just showing how we kind of developed ideas, and you know, I suppose from just like a concept or a thought, you know, based on things we talked about, to like just, you know, kind of images and trying to imagine ways of the dancers, how they might interact with something, to then actually kind of coding it or developing visuals to it, and then you actually working with it and refining it. Yeah. So
yeah, just another little thing for me. It was a big challenge because this was the first time in all of the other projects that I've been involved in that I wasn't a performer. And that was really terrifying, actually. It was because of the way that I work. I kind of put myself in the middle of it. Even in my teaching, the way I teach, it's like I put myself in the middle of it. I'm not really someone to stand on the edge and, you know, I get in there and I feel it out and work with my intuition. So to try to be on the outside more. Of course, I was in there in the rehearsals working out certain things, but it was hugely challenging and nerve-wracking for me, because at the end of the day, I really did just have to step back and just hand it over. So that was
Like,
different. So we were all in new territory, which
Yeah.
I thought was great with this piece. We all got to go into this place equally and say, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but let's just go for it and let's see how well we do.
I mean, I think definitely you having worked with technology as well was very helpful, because it's, you know, it's sort of a skill in and of itself, like knowing how, like, or just even having the knowledge to know how these things work, how slow the process can be. You know, it can be frustrating where you're like, kind of like what you're saying, you know, you want to try something now and you're just like, that's going to be a couple of hours, it's going to be tomorrow before that's ready, you know, because you need to go recode something, or, you know, just it's like something isn't right and you can't just fix it there and then, you know. Yeah, there's many sleepless nights.
Yeah, rehearsals ended at, I don't know, 6 o'clock, and then have sort of
Work again.
Yeah.
Go home and have a little list of things to be done by the next morning.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, there was like 2 weeks where we just didn't go to bed.
You have a video up there that says full performance. Is that on Vimeo or something?
It is, yeah, the full performance of the
Midas #1.
Yeah,
which is
the original
prototype.
is up on Vimeo. Yeah.
If I do a search on that,
Yeah.
it'll come up with it.
You'll find that. You should get a link if you go to our website, which is really due to be updated. There should be a new site in the new year. You should find it there, I'd say. Or yeah, just go on Vimeo. I suppose, I mean, I can show you something from the version 1 where we just kind of stretched it out to the full length kind of version. I can show you. I don't know if I should just maybe jump to.
Maybe jump to 2. Maybe.
Yeah, I think I'll just jump to 2 because that's really where it's at. Like, it was kind of codes 1 was kind of a lesson in for us in what not to do, you know. So yeah, basically the lesson being get into an actual space and, you know, everybody being able to collaborate and work together and feed into the process, you know, rather than just this kind of like working separately just didn't really work for us.
As we discovered, it shouldn't really be called Codes 2.0 because there's kind of so little in common between the two, because we started redeveloping from kind of really basic concepts rather than what's taking the first show and then going, oh, where can we go with this? We started by meeting with Cindy and thinking kind of choreographically
Yeah,
begin with.
it kind of like, I think as well, like just the name kind of came out of, like this version was sort of, I suppose it was kind of bankrolled by someone who wanted us to do performance for them. So they were looking for something specific, in terms of like this show, and we said, well, we're going to be redeveloping it, so that was just the name. But like when we actually got to working with it, and you know, it's like one of the same dancers, and then like Cindy obviously coming on as the choreographer, things changed a lot. Most of the music is different, most of the code is different, all the pre-rendered visuals is all different, so it's pretty much a different show by the end of it. Yeah. So I'm just going to show you just some, we actually haven't put this online, it's just some rough, a rough cut of the second version of the show that we did in Hong Kong. Kind of that's just kind of an overview of the show, and a lot of it is kind of maybe out of context if you're not seeing the whole show as it goes.
You can see from the previous one that you showed and to this one, you can see that the idea is choreography based. You can see the more the sort of like the interaction between the images
Yeah.
and the movement
Yeah.
of the people, you can see that there's actually they're related.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they are sort of like knowing that there's elements. The image knows that there's dancers, and the dancers know that there's this image. And in the first one, at least in the short video, there was this sort of like huge.
There's a lot of stuff
there's
happening.
A lot of stuff happening,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a lot of movement.
Yeah.
And the relationship is not, they're sort of like on top of each other.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But you can sort of like see that the idea there is.
Yeah.
You can also kind of see that it's been developed, the choreography has been developed through the whole working process.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean,
clearly.
Yeah, that's it. And yeah, I think it's actually what's kind of interesting is like I know when we did this, like there's like one person was kind of like, oh, you know, like it wasn't, you know, it's not full color, and you know, there isn't loads of stuff happening, and I mean that's the kind of thing that we were talking about is, you know, sometimes you need to kind of like take things back a little bit, just you know, to kind of to really display an interaction and to allow to communicate what's going on rather than just, you know, throwing loads of stuff in it, you know.
To have really subtle moments that
Yeah.
we were working to try to balance, because it can be so overwhelming
Yeah.
for the audience.
And there are times where it goes
with
big,
all of that.
you know, the whole show.
So how can you use all of that technology to make some really quiet, subtle things as well as
Yeah.
the other end of the scale? So.
Yeah, but I could see an interaction loop there, that the bigger things were sort of like, looked like they were guiding the dancers, and the dancers were guiding the smaller things.
Yeah.
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 So it's bigger thing,
Yeah.
bigger things looking down, and then looking at
Yeah.
the
Well, I
shadow.
think as well, like probably conceptually, like we're, you know, I mean, like the whole thing was really about, you know, people interacting with technology and how that affects them, you know, influencing them influencing it, and then how their interactions with each other would change through using technology. So yeah.
Yeah, you can see
Well,
it.
no, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
No, I was just going to say, when we were having the discussions early on and trying to figure out, well, how do we structure this and how do we, you know, work with this? And so we talked about games. We talked about just really simple rules of games, of like tag and hide and seek, and those sorts of, you know, kids games. So it's all about that power play, like who has the power, who's controlling who, and do you work with that? Do you work against it? How can you shape? So kind of each section then became like, that was the structure of the section, like what's the power play, what's the game here, and how do the dancers and the technology relate to each other in this game?
Yeah.
And
Also, we kind of made the performance more complex. So initially, you started off with solid lines into more kind of curves, and then particle systems, so kind of that developed over time too throughout the
Yeah.
show.
So this is, I think there's an idea of how to sort of like conceptualize these really abstract things so that they actually have meaning.
Mhm.
And what you just said is basically that okay, this is a game of hide and seek.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there you have it. That's and it becomes apparent to the audience that okay, there's this relationship, and it doesn't really matter what the shapes are themselves, or how big they are, or what they are, or how it works. If the concept is kept
Yeah.
here, and then you can just start playing. I'm not sure if you said that you have to sort of like take out the colors.
I
Because
mean,
there's
that,
like this, because I'm not sure if the audience is actually, I'm not sure about this, there's a lot of talk about this sort of like information overload thing that people are kind of afraid of, and I think you took a really nice stand with the first one, that you really just went straight at it, and I think that needs to happen a little bit more
Mhm.
in performances. People are a little bit afraid of information overload, and I think people just can actually process a lot of
Yes.
stuff.
There's something that you said though, that to kind of contextualize the information overload or chaos or things getting really big is the stage reality or the game. You know, if we have the life reality and a stage reality and the game, and within the parameters of the game,
Yeah.
that we
But
can
that's exactly it.
that we
Like,
can take it
if you
to
have
a
this
huge
concept
climax. Or
and you
whatever.
keep the
It's
concept.
within that then
Yeah.
dramatically
Yeah.
it's not overload.
It's not overload
It's-
if there's not an overload of
Valid.
concepts.
Yeah.
I think those are like two different things. Overload of visual information
Mm.
and overload of concepts. If there's like tons of concepts at the same time, then it gets kind of confusing. What's it about if we have like life, death, the universe, and everything
Mhm.
on top of each other, and then we have this visual overload of that, and then there's dance overload, and everything's overloaded.
Yeah.
But I think that was a sort of like key
Mm.
idea that okay, we have to have these concepts of what this is about, and then just extending it and
Yeah.
just playing with the like
And
this
yeah,
information
just
overload.
sort of, and developing that way, yeah.
how
I
you
know what you
can-
mean,
yeah.
yeah.
And it came, sometimes the game was dictated by the design
Yeah,
or by the music idea. So sometimes it kind of came that direction, saying the pendulum,
yeah,
the opening was this big visual pendulum, which you saw a little bit of, that just got more and more complex as it went on. And so it's like, well, how do you work with this huge bar of light? Do you go with it and let it move you, or do you try to run away from it, or do you try to jump over the top of it, or, so that idea actually dictated that whole section of like relationships.
It's really nice when the light stuff through the interaction becomes kind of physical scenography, and the light things are reacted as though they would be like beams of steel or
Yeah,
something.
it looks and feels real.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
starts to feel real through the interaction, through the dancer, that okay, that's a big thing. And when you just put it there without the dancers, it's just animation happening.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And the space seemed
That's-
really huge.
It was.
was it 6 by 8?
I think
And
so.
then like kind of a bit bigger because the set kind of went off, and it was like 5 meters
That's more.
high.
Did you explain that it was commissioned in Hong Kong? You actually travelled to Hong Kong to
We didn't have the physical set, like a proper working set until we arrived.
Yeah.
So we there was a fear of like spinal tap happening where the set is going to reach
So we get this,
Yeah, but it worked out really well in the end. That was kind of one
It was
my main
beautiful
interest in it,
actually, like we did a plan, sent it over, they built it, and it was perfect,
Mm.
And, unfortunately we couldn't bring it back.
And how long did you have when you got over there?
We had 2 days to set up, probably about 2.5. So we got there, let me see, we left Monday morning,
We got there on a Tuesday morning.
got there Tuesday morning, had Tuesday to adjust, tech all day Wednesday, tech all day Thursday, and tech kind of for a half of Friday, and then our first performance on Friday evening, then 2 performances Saturday, then 1 performance Sunday, and then a workshop, and then we went out.
Okay, all jet lag.
Yeah.
Very little sleep.
We actually, we didn't sleep, so.
You can't have jet lag if you don't sleep.
Yeah.
We were talking about like 2 days ago or yesterday, or when was it? We were talking about why do we need the people in these technology performances? Here.
That was my question.
That was your, and I think that just this sort of like answers this interaction thing that was happening here. It's kind of basic though, but it answers, it sort of like makes the virtual more physical here. And I think that's kind of wonderful, and it wouldn't happen without it.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. It was probably more conceptual. I mean, I was curious if you guys ever worked with playwrights or dramaturgs, someone who may take a more conceptual approach rather
Be
than-
interested in doing it, but like it's yet to happen.
Yeah.
I think like at the moment we're actually looking to work maybe with like musicians. So we've actually got like a band that we're going to work with. We're going to do something and just sort of take, I suppose, what we've learned from doing this kind of thing, and then just use it as like a kind of like a stage setup, But yeah, there's obviously a bit of to and fro with that in terms of like how far we want to push it, and we don't like if I have my way, it wouldn't be like a band up on a stage, it would be like more in the round and kind of more immersive. I think that'd be an interesting way of doing it. Then obviously they want to kind of do it up on a stage and slightly more traditional.
But you know the performance work of the scenic design of Robert Wilson? I'm thinking of his piece like Einstein on the Beach, which is a very famous opera. And, you know, one of the things that's interesting because of the kind of remarkable choreography that was in there, but also kind of advances in technology and the music of Philip Glass. But it had a really kind of fascinating dramaturgy that followed that trajectory on there. And I do think a lot of the things that we've been talking about this week and seeing this week, seems like to me if there's something that it might be missing is not, certainly not the technological edge. I mean, it's really, you know, I don't know if you could get any more advanced on this at this point. And also the aesthetic choices that are being made on that. But that occasionally one would like to see that conceptual thread, you know, that is sort of you keep saying, why are we doing this, or why are these images there? You know? Although, I mean, you know, you can certainly make the argument it's abstraction, you know, and the game is the design.
Yeah.
On
Yeah, and like it's kind of something that we're figuring out all the time as we just go along, you know, and because I suppose, like I was kind of saying before, it's like, yeah, in a way, you know, we just feel like technicians, but then it's like bit by bit, you sort of like start getting an idea of like maybe why you're doing it or what makes sense to you.
That's actually an interesting idea because I mean, as a composer, when I'm making composition, that's actually a dramaturgic decision because that's happening in the relation of time. And that's basically the dramaturgy. How do you compose the happening in the relation of time? And
I think mapping means a more sort of like conceptual dramaturgy, so that there's like these concepts that are not so much the elements and the moods.
Well, it would be simultaneous. I mean,
that's where I was coming to because there are different kinds of comprehensions of dramaturgy, of course. I mean, in music, it's probably different than in theater or in dance, or so combining these different things makes it even actually more interesting.
Yeah, well, the piece that I was just referencing, Einstein on the Beach, has Philip Glass's music, which
has its own
works in
dramaturgy.
kind of Einsteinian.
Exactly. So
way.
combining other kinds of art forms with their dramaturgy with each other is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think the concepts are completely missing because we wouldn't have any concepts without metaphors. And there are metaphorical impulses that sort of construct concepts also, which are very concrete, up and down.
Oh, I'm not saying these are conceptual less. I was wondering if there was a direction, you know, what a dramaturg tradition would do, sort of given an overall philosophical or whatever, or genre, which doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in abstraction. I'm just curious if you worked with someone.
We didn't, but that was all, those things were considered, yes, because we wanted some kind of logic from the beginning all the way to the end. So part of the logic was the decision to, you know, structure these sequences as games or certain kind of power plays. Then there was also the visual logic of starting with incredibly simple, like literally one line, and by the time we got to the very end of the show, we were working with particle systems that were moving independently of one another, and the lines became boxes, and the boxes became triangles, and the triangle. So there was that development that happened through the piece as well. And with each section, there was actually a kind of a resolution that then transitioned into the next section, which sometimes was led by the dancer and sometimes was led by the technology. So that was also linking, like, what is the game now? What's the power play? Sometimes we acted it as if the dancers didn't know what was going on. There was one piece that was this swiveling pendulum, and they're sort of left, it's a dramatic boom, a big change visually and sonically, and they're sort of left in the space, standing on the opposite sides of the space to each other. and they just stand really still because they don't know what's going on until one of them moves, and then suddenly this thing starts to move, and they go, aha, this bar. So then they start to play this challenge game back and forth with. So it was, yeah, those sorts of considerations were definitely like, and some things that we wanted to work with didn't make it in the piece because of, they didn't fit the internal logic of where we were headed, you know.
And time constraints.
And
as
time
well. It's like,
constraints.
there's
As
stuff,
always.
stuff that we would have liked to have developed. There's kind of like, there's like bits of stuff that was like almost there but wasn't quite there, and we just sort of like ended up cutting it because of that. And,
Yeah.
you know.
You can work with the same as well, though.
It's a very important question, really, because like, how much time should we really be giving over to teching, you know, and how much time, like, really, it's what you're producing is a piece of dance or theatre or dance theatre, and this is the problem at the moment is that we are giving so much time to like teching and coding and stuff that ultimately has to adversely affect the narrative of the story or the concept.
Unless the technology is, we're trying to do an equal part. Maybe it's not
What's
dance
intrinsic
or
to it,
dance
you know,
theatre.
yeah.
Maybe you're using the elements of the language of choreography as a way of creating a dramaturgy wherein the technology and the live performers can coexist, as opposed to making a dance piece that has nice lights. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, and I think that that's the point of the dramaturgy as well, is to create a universe, a fallible universe, wherein these things can coexist, these elements, and the technology is vital in order for the relationship
Yeah.
to run its course. I don't think at all too much time is being given over to the technology, because without it,
Yeah, but
the universe doesn't exist.
But
And
it
we have
does,
no
it does
relationship.
affect it. Definitely, I agree with you that it does affect the way that we work, because it's like,
Yeah.
But then it
If
just
we- if we
takes
want-
longer.
yeah, yeah.
The project
but
just
if we have a
takes
dance piece
longer.
and we want to
That's it.
rehearse the choreography, then we need time to do that, and then we have a dance piece. If we have a dance piece with lights, then we need time to rehearse the choreography and then rehearse the lights. And then rehearse them to build the lights and then rehearse them together. So it takes longer if we have another element.
But that's
And
just
that's-
the
But this is
universe.
just,
That's-
it's so
that's-
tied to the
yeah,
choreography
that's
that
it.
it's like,
But of course
you
it
couldn't
starts
do the
to-
choreography
Yeah,
without it.
but-
Yeah,
It's
well,
like-
this was the big thing to get back, because we worked, this was our first time working together, and first time you guys working with a choreographer, and that was, I remember like our initial meetings of saying, I cannot make the choreography without the technology, because the technology teaches me how to make the choreography and makes certain decisions for me out of this bank of material that I've created. So what we need is time, what we need is a space to set up everything perfectly and just keep working and working. A laboratory, really, set up a lab where we can experiment and refine and refine and refine as much as possible until we have to perform.
Like
Yeah.
ideally
And
you'd
that
have
was the point.
drafting.
And you had a deadline, so you had a
Yeah.
fixed goal, so.
Well,
Yeah.
I
Yes,
think
the
that-
project,
and
yes.
like
it-
in
it's
a
true.
way, it's like, you know,
Code as well.
we spent what, it was a month pretty much in space,
Mm-hmm.
you know, working on it, which isn't like, it's not a ridiculous amount of time, you know, to spend on, you know, something like, you know, what we did, like, you know, really.
It's actually short.
It's a very, very
Yeah.
short, it's a very short time.
40
Very
minutes
shocking
show
how
at the
much
end
you
of it,
get
so-
done in 2.5 days, to be honest with you. I think, trying to match your points yourself, I think what I'm seeing is a visual poetic language, and what we're probably talking about here is where it meets a dramatic language or a choreographic language. And it depends really what your outcome is. But we're hardwired for story, aren't we? And maybe that, I'd be interested in what your audience, outside of the applause that you must get, okay, what you get from your audience when you get down and talk to them, what they get from it.
Yeah, it's kind of, I suppose it's hard to say, like,
Does anything feedback? Did you pick up anything? from
like,
their
I
reaction?
mean, really good feedback in terms of people enjoying it,
Yeah.
people like largely kind of getting it, you know, and then like I think
Did a
it was-
Q&A at the end of every show.
Yeah,
which
yeah, we
was
did a
very
Q&A
informative.
after, you know, so it was always kind of like, generally like pretty good feedback, like almost exclusively. I think there was one person who was just sort of a bit kind of like baffled by what was this.
Which end is up?
And it's just sort of like, I mean, yeah, that happened. You know, like any piece like this, it's not for everyone.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what's not to like about it. I mean, it's, you know, it's really seductive. It's beautiful. You know, the audio is really. I mean, it's just a harmonious, you know, kind of brilliant piece of performance work. I'm not sure how it challenges. You know, just, I don't know how you'd not like it. I think it's.
That's such an interesting. What you just said is stuck in my head. We're hardwired for story.
Yeah. I'm a filmmaker first.
Okay. I'm not sure. What if we're hardwired for relationship, which is not necessarily the same thing, because then you can have a relationship with abstract things or concepts.
I think we look for story as a painter. I know people are looking for what's it about.
Well, sure, with dance pieces, I have that after every piece. Well, so what was it about?
That's definitely hardwired for change.
Yes.
Because whether it's a long story or a short story, but changing it. If we look at the same happening all over all the time, then we get bored. So there has to be change.
Yeah. But I think that's the
change creates story.
Yes, exactly.
We start to put them together
and making a story, because there's a huge universe inside our head, because we make all kinds of assumptions.
Yeah, to play on your map idea, you know, the open map, where am I?
Yeah, exactly.
Where am I going and how do I get there?
Yeah. But I mean, like we avoided kind of like a strict narrative, you know, in that sense of like, because we like when we did our first full-length show, we did kind of stick to a narrative because of that. Like we need to rely on a story, and we just kind of felt it was like, do people actually get it? And actually, some people did, and you know, it was restrictive, you know, just like just in terms of the medium that we're working in, it's restrictive to have to sort of work that way, you know, and it was just, it was really liberating to be able to kind of go, just try different stuff, let it develop as we went along in a way, but like, you know,
more
stuff.
abstract approach,
Yeah.
but yeah, we still tried to bring in a progression and that kind of a story, but not
It's just,
not a story about here's a character and he does
exactly,
something.
yeah.
This happens.
Well, that's not at all what I was suggesting by having a dramaturg involved in it. It's really more of a unified conceptual level, which could be pure abstraction, you know, that may come from a different kind of unifying thing, which isn't necessarily about character, anthropomorphism, or traditional narrative on there. But it is a different way of linking a performance together that, you know. I think of the great abstract artists from, you know, Clay and Kandinsky or whatever, you know, there's something in there that is an organizing principle that communicates to us in a really kind of profound way.
Yeah, right to that, I think we are dealing with sometimes with this sort of work, we're dealing with the black box syndrome. The big philosophical strain behind it all is that we try to bring the world inside the black box with all the elements, when we're dealing with so many elements. Whereas during the antiquity, they had very strict rules about acting, staging, story, but those performances opened up to the community. So it was a reverse sort of process. They had very sort of strict rules and very limited means of doing the performance. But the places where they performed were like open spaces where you could see the whole city present. And so it was a very different sort of environment. But the modern strain is to more to bring the world inside the black box with all the elements and then release something from that process outside the black box.
Kind of a consequence of the kitchen sink drama, to use the stage as a microcosm for examining the human condition. And when we use devices like the Greeks, in order just to be heard, or to use one small symbol to represent a myriad of meanings, so that thousands of people could watch at the same time.
But you know, it's also
A heartbeat can be a story,
yeah.
and I think what we're looking for is not story particularly, but a focalizer, something within the piece that's, like Cindy said, that I can relate to and put my story onto and feel my heartbeat through. So this organising principle can be the heartbeat, or the black and white, or the development from squares to triangles, or whatever those things are, but that I can have a relationship with it because I have a sense that I may understand what's going to happen next.
Yeah,
This logic is...
And it's also like what I find really interesting is that the timeline stretches. I mean, if you're watching a fire, when it's, you know, it's basically the same all the time, but it's basically different all the time. And you can sit and watch a fire. Once you start the fire, you can sit and watch it like 2 hours, and it fades, and it you know, when it blows a bit, it comes up, and it's really interesting. And all the time you're watching the fire, you're building a universe in your head, and you're thinking this and you're thinking that, and you all kinds of stuff. So you're making the dramaturgy just watching the fire. I mean, it's that simple. It's in here all the time. And then there are people that are starting to manipulate the fire to get your attention, to take your universe to another direction, just manipulating the fire. And that's what I find really interesting in for example, in music. That can you actually create a dynamic timeline just by doing small manipulations, that your thinking is changing. And not the way that I think the explosions or dramatic changes in the music, but the change is here, and it can be really dramatic, although the change in music isn't that dramatic.
Yeah.
That's what I find really interesting.
On the practical level, we're still dealing with, there's an analogy with the antiquity, when they introduced the second actor. It was like, wow, you know, I can actually have a dialogue with someone.
Yeah.
But this is so, on a practical level, we're still, well, using technology, we're introducing some bits and pieces that, wow, I can actually do something with this, and so it's
You can overcomplicate though as well. I think that certainly as a performer, as a composer for the stage, you can forget to trust that we are all very intelligent, and that we can all build relationships with the fire, or with the heartbeat, or with something that's very, very simple, and it doesn't have to have explosions. It can be such a gentle seduction that will help you change the mind. And I know, and the patience, just to allow people to arrive at their own relationship and their own understanding of the concept, which we will never be able to control, and no amount of flashy lights is going to do that. I mean, it can be just the simplest little thing, like Beckett's spotlight. You know, these things can, we talk about paring things back, they can come back so far. You know, like the dancer having a relationship with his line is infinitely more interesting because there's so much space there for me to put my story around it, which makes it more interesting to me, you know.
And what's not there is there.
Exactly, yeah, and there's space for me, and we can afford to leave so much space for the audience. Like, I think this idea of black box theatre is just dead anyway. I mean, I'm not sure of what I believe in terms of performing arts anymore.
White box.
White box now, exactly, yeah.
You know, a virtual space maybe.
Yeah, and I know my voice will not be exposed.
I mean, who doesn't love a good car chase? But but I think space is the place.
The unknown frontier.
Are these your storyboards?
Yeah, so these are, I suppose they're kind of, at some points, I don't know where they're from in the process, but
Looks pretty early.
yeah, it's pretty early, like, they're pretty hard to see actually on the screen. But basically just doing out storyboards for, like, this is our stage, top down view, and this is kind of what we're doing. So just it's because like I think we did have that thing where it's kind of like trying to communicate the ideas was sort of not difficult, but like trying to work out the language of like how we communicate with each other. You know, of, like sort of like trying to say to Mark, oh, it should look like this, you know, or like this kind of thing, and say like, you know, this is sort of the interaction the dancer has, like these are kind of the parameters that you should be thinking about working with, and then you know, going and trying to code something and making it react in a certain way that, you know, oh, it should bend, or it should, you know, bounce back and forward, or, you know, those kind of things. So just kind of a way of trying to lock everything down and, you know, sort of communicate with everyone. So yeah, we just started doing with these kind of storyboards, which as you can see, well, this is like the opening. That kind of, I remember like the opening kind of developed on its own. We sort of like took it a bit further than what we'd storyboarded.
Yeah, it was literally putting up the pendulum idea in the space, in the theatre space that we were working in, with all the lights and all the sound and everything, and letting the dancers play with it. I mean, I even gave them very little to work with initially, because I feel like there's a really deep intelligence in the body. When you put people inside of these immersive environments, they respond in a particular way that you just cannot predict. So I have certain ideas of things that I would like, but I'm really interested to see what spontaneously and deeply out of their own bodily intelligence comes out. And then I can use that material as well as the bank of material or the bank of choreography that we've already been playing with. So it developed out of just giving it some time for them to mess around with it and trying different types of music, because we also, the bits of music were sort of floating around, and it was literally like, well, put that in there, and what happens then? And, okay, what if there's no music at all? And, you know, so it was really just trying to keep the environment as fluid as possible as you can, working with technology, because when you have a deadline, you do have to nail things down at a certain point, because there's all that time it takes to code, and then try it out again, and try it out again. And
I think what you were saying about like sort of letting the dancers go and play with it, it's like just having that set up, it's really, it's sort of seductive in a way, in that like everyone kind of feels compelled at some point to kind of jump in and start playing about and doing stuff. It's just, it's a different experience.
And you did.
Yeah.
You guys were in there too.
Everyone did, you know.
I just jumped in.
I think that's something that you can really work with though when you're building this kind of interactive technological live performance, is this, what's it called, an inner mimetic. This desire, this impulse that I have that I'm doing what they're doing, particularly if I like it. I feel like I'm swinging on the trapeze or doing that pirouette or that backflip. And we can really, I think, give that a lot of space. The audience want to get in there. So how do I play with that tension as well as giving an awful lot to look at or vibe with, but that there is this existing tension there that we can use in our dramatic compositions.
And I think it's not because my music is in you or out there, but it's precisely the interaction. It's a virtual interface that you maintain with the world.
It's powerful.
I think having the demo set we built in DCU helped, even from my perspective, actually understand the space, because I like 3D models and stuff for graphics, but actually being able to kind of go in with the guys and using stretches and kind of sit on parts of the set, and it kind of helped really get a feel for how it would, like, you know, how would you implement the graphics best in the set along with the code stuff. So.
And I suppose it's just like how it feels to be in that space, you know, and just kind of like, I suppose with the technology, just in that way that it's sort of like, I suppose for the most part it's kind of like what we're going for is that it's its own thing, but then at these times it kind of becomes an extension of the performer, and it's sort of like you're just like kind of has that feeling like you're changing your body or what you can do, or your ability or something like that, you know, even if it's in that kind of simple weird way, but it's just kind of, it's an interesting space to be in.
That only kind of comes about during the kind of, it's sort of technical, but it's kind of the development time when we're in the venue, because you can't really visualize it when you're drawing pictures and storyboards. You can, because I mean, sometimes it feels different in when it's real and there. And the thing is, technically the system might not respond quite how you envisaged it.
There's so many factors, and I'm sure you guys have worked with like infrared light and tracking and stuff like that, and you know it's tricky and it changes.
Even very practical things like what kind of materials can the dancers wear in order for the infrared to be read properly, you know. And you guys were, I remember when you were going around and buying things, you actually had your
infrared camera.
We were getting
your
stopped
phone.
in shops because we had a laptop and a camera going around shops trying to find materials that worked well, and
And then they have to wear those in performance or in rehearsals, of course, because you can't wear one thing in a rehearsal and then another thing in a performance. So then that's a completely different way than you would normally work, like a dance performance piece or a live piece. You would kind of costume it a lot of times at the end. But this, like, you have to be in what you're going to be performing in pretty much from the beginning. So.
And it's especially important when you're working with a big mock-up system. Matt Delbert, who was our director for the workshops when we did Hamlet and Ibsen with the big system, was like telling the actors not to take off the suit, that you're not allowed, you're in the suit, and with the suit you sort of, you have your skin tells you an awful lot about who you are, and the skin is the interface, skin and the suit is the interface that you use to control the avatar. But you have to wear the suit the whole day.
Because the system won't react without it.
You
can't understand or you can't understand it.
So even if you take the markers off for a while, then you need to suit, but of course you can't, because even the smallest movement sort of changes.
And it changes it,
That's a new performance.
Paint.
It's just like, it is that tricky thing, and then having to take it to the other side of the world and make sure that everything stays the same.
Not
it's very funny how the smallest thing can destroy everything. Like, where's the marker? Oh, it's there. Somebody in somebody's shoe. So,
Who swallowed the marker?
We spend an awful lot of time trying to find markers on the floor. It's kind of funny. Where is it?
You know, the one thing, well, there's several things, but one thing that really, for me, being kind of in the center of like working with you and then working with you guys as well, and the similarity is that the desire to give the technology a personality or have it as an equal kind of playing partner in the live stage space, and we talked about it, we kept using that word as well, and I realized that we worked with that a lot too. It's like, how can you enable this inanimate thing to have a personality, and what does that mean, and how do you relate to it?
What kind of personality did it have?
Well, in the games, so it was that, as you were saying, the response of the dancers to the technology kind of gave it this, from an audience perspective, for me anyway, gave it this, it has the power, it doesn't have the power, it's playing with you, it's teasing, it's shy, it's, so we're, of course these are all human, anthropomorphizing it, that's,
I think the important thing about character, though, when you talk about character or personality and things, that in a dramatic context, characters are reactive. It's like you can't say to somebody, be seductive. You can say, seduce me. So when the character has a task and when everybody around that character responds, you can't say be sexy, but everybody else can find you incredibly attractive, and therefore that reality exists. And I think the same thing, I think we can be kinder to ourselves and say that the same thing can apply to the technology, in that the character exists insofar as we react to that technology in a particular way, in so much as it is generating its own character.
Basically, you can't be sexy if you're alone.
Basically, yeah. My mirror thinks
Speak for
I'm
yourself. It's been many happy hours.
All sexy.
Can you edit that out of the video?
But actually, just from an audience perspective, that big kind of scan line pendulum thing swinging across for me had quite a kind of a monstrous effect on me.
Yeah.
It seemed like I think, did somebody liken to a big swinging steel girder?
Yeah.
Yeah, that it had immense power actually,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously then the choreography propounded that by the dancers falling over as it passed through them and stuff. So it seemed like a really strong blast wave going through them or something.
Yeah, it was at the end, it became a more aggressive presence,
That's
and then
predictable as well.
the graphics and everything changed quite a lot. The edges became harder, it became more kind of pixelated. At the beginning, and even with the sound, is quite gentle. So the response of the dancers was, my image was that when you're at the ocean or at the sea, and the tide comes up, and if you it's like you let the water sort of just very gently shift you, like as if your body is made of sand. So you're just this shifting sand, so the movement is very, very gentle, and the relationship to the light and to the sand is very gentle, and it eventually gets more and more and more aggressive until they're running away from it and they're trying their best, and it just keeps knocking them down. So it kind of, that was the progression, that was the idea that we...
But projector light is really, the white projector light is really, it's kind of aggressive in
It's a
itself.
dark space as well.
Yeah, in a dark space, and it's like the contrast is really hard.
Yeah,
And
well,
it's
that kind of was one of the reasons behind going with not introducing loads of colours, just to get that contrast.
Yeah.
Just the light and dark, and using that to play with it.
We reached the point where I felt we discussed colour and we kind of decided we were kind of putting it in just for the sake of putting it in, rather than having a justified reason to deviate from just the black and white. So we kind of just settled on it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Just again, time.
It was fun. I mean, if we were developing it more, we might sort of come to a point where we want to bring colour in if it's got a sort of purpose, kind of a meaning to
And
sort
that's
of
sort of
portray.
like soften stuff up a little bit, so you can get this more, because
Have more layers to it as well.
have more sort of a dynamic
Yeah.
with just the sort of like light color. It becomes more light design idea. That what do I want to use daylight throughout the whole set, or do I want to use tungsten warm light or red backlight or...
Depends on the aesthetic that you're going for, really, doesn't it? I remember seeing some of Alvin Nicolai's sketches, because he was big into hiding and showing, obliterating characters through really strong light. And that was the first thing I thought of actually when I looked at these. I think these are actually really beautiful in themselves. The idea of how this has kind of evolved. Even the language, the notation and stuff on the sides is kind of, it's evolved. It's evolved with the technology, the grammar that you're using, and is kind of evolved from maybe the language that was being used by somebody like Alvin Nicolai back in the 50s, who was using kind of electrical lighting I think those sketches are really cool. I think they were really lovely.
It really helped to give at least some kind of parameter for
It's a good foundation for all of us.
Really helped a lot.
Well,
And it helped the dancers too, so.
what Neil is saying there is interesting, because it is, we have a tendency to think of this kind of work as almost growing brand new out of a vacuum, ex nihilo. where in fact it's got a long tradition, you know, throughout the 20th century, and the history of the avant-garde can really be looked at. There's a whole confrontation between performance and technology from the symbolist in the late 19th century, but I mean, things that come to mind immediately, this would be Oskar Schlemmer at the Bauhaus from the 20s, or the Russian futurist. And they all had a lot of theory about how this worked and what didn't work and successes. So there's probably, you know, a lot to be learned from what they were able to establish and work from and develop.
Or Kandinsky, for example.
Yeah.
Or photographic.
Oh yeah, and the yellow sound.
Yeah.
That's actually what we, in last year's workshop, we used Cora Bragg's set for Hamlet from 1911 as as an inspiration for the virtual setting, and we tried to do the same thing with the markers. So it was a kind of funny connection. It became something completely different. In the end, it didn't have much to do with Gordon Frank. It did actually, yeah.
Oh, yes, so this is an early. Just looking up a bit, it is an early storyboard.
Yeah, and some of the stuff didn't happen, and
Yeah.
sometimes we just jumped, like it sort of made logical sense to go from one point to another, and then kind of like when it was all said and done and finished, you kind of thought, maybe that didn't fit in there, and, you know, going back, we can tweak bits here and there.
I love the language there, stuff like working together in one bounding box. Like bounding box is completely a computer word. That's a word that came from gaming, you know, to detect collisions and stuff.
Oh, okay.
And there was something over there, relation, you know, polygon complexity. Yeah, it's really, really interesting, you know, how the notational language has developed, you know, when you think about as Matthew said, the history of, you know, stage notation. It's really interesting.
And then on my notes, it would have had my sort of choreographic correlation to some, because that was something that came up quite a lot, is the language differences.
So I hadn't worked with dancers at all, so we were in this space actually animating along as the guys were dancing around, and just to kind of see you guys explore the storyboards in the real world was very interesting, how I approached the graphics as well. So it kind of, it was definitely a massive learning curve.
Sort of learning, and each group of people or different artists that I've worked with, they kind of use the language of the technology that they're working with and how they work with it in live performance. The vocabulary is slightly different. So this is also a very fluid space that I think is developing alongside of the technology, alongside of all of us figuring out how to use it or how to work.
I always remember talking about graphics, and then it sort of became, it's like, oh, well, is this animation, is this generative, is it?
Well, yeah, generative.
Yeah.
And then I'm explaining that to the dancers, saying, what? What do you keep? What's generative? You know, so that was, just learning those sorts of things. And then, of course, learning when we say space or when we, certain words.
Space baby.
Space baby. That's a very specific choreographic concept. Space baby.
I figured that.
The world isn't ready yet. Space baby.
Space baby did appear, actually. Yeah. At the end, in Russian solo.
I mean, I don't know, these want to see any more of it or more in depth. I can show Roshins.
Yeah.
If you just show us another clip.
I can show Roshins right now. I've got the other videos. They're on my laptop over there.
Oh.
I can show them, but we should probably, if we're going to do any kind of demonstration on our miniature, we should probably do that first, and I can jump over, because I've got like 100 gigs of video.
The video's on there.
Oh, you've got
If
all
you
the-
know, if you can
okay.
find it,
Sorry, it is here. I can show it everyone.
That's a really nice, those two sections together, into the end. Yeah.
Two scenes of
Transition.
yeah.
Just, do you want to talk a little bit about the music?
Touch on music. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think the music for this one, it was definitely because before everything always started with the music for the first two pieces, and then this time I was kind of happy to take more of a back seat and let you guys sort of work. Like there was music, you know, kind of written, but it was more kind of like before it was like I've written this piece of music for this particular piece and the visuals are going to look like this kind of thing, whereas it was more kind of a big pot of picking out bits of music that we felt worked for certain parts, you know, and you know, you would kind of come, you know, we had like a Dropbox with all the audio files in it, and you know, so you'd be like, you know, I was thinking this might work here, and this might work there, and that's where it's like there's some, I think there's like 2, maybe 3 pieces of music that were used before, and then there was like some new stuff that kind of came about, and just I suppose to me, like maybe it's not complete in my head, but stuff that I started working on from just being around you guys, that was kind of, you know, maybe we had a piece of music in mind, or we weren't going to use music, or but then it sort of like triggered something in my head that I was like, right, I'll go away, and this sort of fits it. And that's, it's kind of, it was an interesting and completely different way for me to work, because I suppose I was used to kind of like maybe dictating with the music, you know. But it was nice to not do that.
And did you use any, you know, real-time intervention in the music, or was it?
No, and it was something that we wanted to do, and we did actually have it set up at one point, but just the software was crashing. Yeah, we're using because everything, all the audio runs from Ableton is using Max Relive, and just like basically had kind of XY coordinates that were relating to different sort of samples with different effects on them, so they would play back depending on where the dancers were or their relationship to each other, things like that we're working with, but just kept crashing. So it got shelved eventually because time was pushing on.
Live crashed or Max crashed?
It was just that patch.
Yeah, it just seemed to be that particular patch I was using, like was it Sonic Sphere? I think it is. I'll be able to show it to you later on in the day. But it was really weird. It was sort of just it was killing the audio for some reason. Like live wasn't actually crashing and you know and shutting down. It was just killing the audio after a couple of minutes. So. Yeah, it all looked okay, but
and it's like it worked
really,
part of the time, didn't it? But you had to open the set and drop the patch in again.
Yeah,
if you open the set with the patch there,
There would be some internal rules and interference that they can be really, you know, hard to solve, unfortunately.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's something that we've wanted to do for a while, and yeah, it's interesting to hear about you guys talking about what you're doing, and I just always found it kind of difficult to make sense of the output, you know, when in that kind of environment of trying to generate, you know, stuff that's.
You mean the sort of like the data input to you and the output?
Really?
Yeah, just like in terms of what the audio, because you know a lot of people work with, you know, it's just like filters going off things and stuff like that, and like I suppose it's just trying to like not doing something for the sake of doing it, you know, so it kind of it's just kind of needs time in and of itself to try and develop kind of like I suppose it's like the language of that audio and that piece, you know, and it's just sort of something we didn't have time to do really, but we're going to try and introduce it in some parts, you know, just to at least start thinking about it and start developing it in some way, but you know, I know it's new to me.
It's kind of hard sort of figure out that what you got to do with the data
Yeah,
and how to do it in such a way that it pleases you,
yeah,
and probably so that it doesn't sound or look like everything else out there.
yeah,
With, you know, filters, it's pretty quickly kind of
Yeah.
starts to resemble a lot of stuff.
yeah, exactly.
So
I think that's it. And I don't know. I think definitely, well, like the audio this time around, like the music was definitely started leaning towards soundscapes a bit more, because previously it was less. It would be more like almost like song based, and that's kind of like my background, you know, is doing that. And I don't know, it was just sort of like, I mean, many years ago when I started working on music, I would have, you know, because I have like no classical background, I just had a sampler, we just make sounds, you know, record things, slow them down and layer them up and do stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting to come back to doing that sort of stuff again, you know. But I definitely wasn't in that space before working the other two, because I was just like happy to be writing music, because I never knew how to write music, you know. So yeah, but I think maybe the interaction works better. It's easier to do with soundscapes and that kind of thing. That is like less tonal, I suppose. It's easier to do, but yeah, I don't know. It just it would definitely. It kind of seems like it would dictate quite a lot. You know, it's sort of like the technology ends up dictating an awful lot. About like what the actual, I suppose, the aesthetic of the music is going to be.
yeah, and the performance
Yeah.
as well. That's definitely.
It's always the question of how much power do you want to give each element?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if, like me, I don't know if you're kind of talking about the same thing, but I find a lot of audio-visual stuff does have very specific sort of sound, and I find it a bit boring. Didn't necessarily want to go there. I'm happy at times to kind of, you know, to go to the slums and use stuff that almost sounds a bit poppier, you know, at times. And yeah, other times it's good to use like more harsher sounds and noise and stuff like that, but just mix it to try and do something a bit different, you know, and successfully or not, I don't know. But, yeah, so I think that's really all I have to say. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, ask me if you're interested in anything else to do with music, but yeah, it definitely was kind of took a bit more of a backseat this time around. So will I put on some video?
Yeah. Which bits are you going to show?
I've got.
Oh yeah.
The Russian solo here. Actually, just finishing up on the audio, what was kind of interesting this time is the soundtracks were a lot more fluid than before, so they weren't. Some of them had a specific timeline of start to finish, and then other ones didn't. So it was kind of the performances changed slightly, and some, you know, sometimes they were, you know, I don't know, maybe a minute longer or something like that, and it's going to the end of the audio or something. I just started like looping stuff and like bringing in other layers and playing them in the beat. So yeah, just like on the fly live. And it was interesting. I really enjoyed it, and kind of the same thing. We started playing with the visuals. Like in this one, it's like a really simple interaction for us, but just doing attraction and repulsion with the particles. But it's really enjoyable to kind of play with and to actually watch a performer, you know, using it, and you kind of feed into it and feed off them. You know, even if you're not on stage, you're still kind of performing in some way. And it's definitely something that we'd like to do a lot more of. You know, yeah, just generally sort of like move away from timelines a bit more and try and free things up a bit. So yeah, this is towards the end of the piece. We have this solo with Roisin and part of the system.
Derek, you mentioned there that you using that particle system, you actually you felt like you got a chance to actually jam and be part of it.
Yeah. It was, and it was just like one button. Well, we developed it to be a bit more complex, but we just found it was kind of more intuitive with one button. So very
That was
an
So what
approach.
were you just increasing and decreasing like gravity, like
Yeah, like
attraction
it's
and
attraction to an object and
Yeah.
then letting it
Yeah.
go and do its own thing. But we'd sort of done up different kinds of controls.
You could have it attract to an individual dancer, or you could have it attract to a sort of a random attraction, or just disperse completely,
or swap.
or swap. And yeah, and we just like in terms of the interface that we had. Well, I mean, if we developed it a bit more, we could have made the interface easier to work with. But because it wasn't that easy to work with, we ended up sticking to very simple sort of rules for it.
Yeah.
But it's probably maybe worked better that way as well.
Yeah, no, like we had a similar thing here for Curran, that's what I remember. It's just interesting because one of the things that came up earlier in the week was how much autonomy to give over to the computer and our unwillingness to let go, just see where it goes, So it's just.
I think it's kind of funny. It was just sort of like not being able to help ourselves, just wanting to be part of it in a way, But
well, it's not the fact of wanting to be part of it. It's the fact of like, because that's a complex system, and you could like just let it go.
Yeah.
And let the system just go into complete arbitrariness.
Yeah.
But there's that need there's always that like need to hang on, but also to keep the the structure of the performance in place. So like, but there is also that possibility of just letting the computer do it.
Yeah, I think it's probably just going on a different tangent, and it wasn't something that we decided out of principle we should do or whatnot. It was just sort of interesting in terms of experimenting and saying, because we're basically kind of enacting these controls, like the system that we use, so it's Open Frameworks that's running it, and then we're like kind of like publishing those controls and creating an interface in VDMX. I don't know if anyone knows VDMX. And basically doing up control systems, and then from there you can I think we just stuck to that, but it's sort of like it kind of became this thing where you can sort of almost build it like an instrument, because then you can publish the control systems from VDMX and export to like TouchOSC, and you've got an interface in front of you, so you can start having sliders, X, Y controls, so you can say, right, what we did realise is you need to keep things simple, or else you just lose the run of it, But you can have stuff like, say, with particles, maybe a attraction button, and then maybe X, Y for a direction of where you want the particles to go, that kind of thing. And it's probably just another conversation of maybe like technicians becoming performers in a way, that kind of thing. I don't know where you draw the line then, You start just like feeding into the performance and becoming part of it,
Does the performance change from night to night, or is the choreography pre-rehearsed, locked down, limited amount of projection change?
Interesting. It depends, because I worked with I created choreography differently for different sections. That end section, the duet, was a set piece of choreography. So I took, because the music, we decided on the music, and it knew it was a certain amount of time, basically, that I had, and I wanted to make this duet. I just wanted to make something that had a lot of momentum and a lot of just didn't stop.
That's probably the most different to anything else.
Yeah, so I decided to do it in a very postmodern way. Here's this piece of music. I only listened to it a few times because I memorized music so quickly. So I didn't want to listen to it too much. I knew I had the feel of it, and then created this set piece of repeatable steps to work with that, and then, you know, modified it depending on how we were going to make the ending. We tried lots of different endings. Then for Roisin solo, say, the way I created the choreography was that there were also repeatable movements, but the time that she took to do them and complete the task was quite open. But then that also matched, you know, the particle system that was so to have that kind of fluidity in the time and in the choreography kind of balanced. So, and then like say for the opening section of the pendulum,
That was
it was timeline. So I had a structure, a choreographic structure that was somewhat fluid, but the specificity was within the timeline of the piece. So again, because I think for me it seems to work better to not do a series of repeatable steps, because then you build into the idea of the choreography that paying attention and responding to the system is the choreography. You just have to define how you're going to do that and how much time you're going to take to do those things. So that was a difficult thing for the dancers to learn, because it's not traditionally dance is a set of repeatable steps, and Roisin had done a little bit of work with these guys before, but like Lorcan hadn't. And he had done some improvising, but it's not really improvising either. I mean, you improvise when you're devising the structure for things, but actually it's pretty set. It's, you know, it is a choreography, but it's a different type of choreography. So. And, you know, it's taught me a lot to be trying to figure out how to relate that to the dancers, how to give them things that were very clear and specific, and also what I kind of saw in my head, but then also allow them the freedom and the ability and the intelligence to respond in real time. So
Is it kind of what set of rules, in a sense? Like in the most simplest way, that once you take 3 steps, then you turn left and then you turn around and so forth. So if you're given certain kinds of rules, and when you're improvising, you use these rules. Is that the way you basically do it?
Yes, but I still don't call it improvisation.
But that's how the choreography.
But that's how the
is, or
choreography
that's how it's choreographed.
kind of-
And that- like I mean, I think there was probably 3 instances where time in the show where time didn't strictly come into play, you know, but like within reason. You know.
Well, if you consider choreography, I know how Cindy works, and I love the idea of applying choreographic principles to artworks and other different fields. And if we consider choreography to be like the setting in motion of a series of events or a series of tasks, and choreography being the organization of certain tasks or events rather than steps, then you can improvise with things like time and space and physics, gravity, as opposed to walk over there, pick up that cup and put it on the table, and, you know, so that you're working with kind of the more fundamental elements of the technology, or the bodies, or the bodies in motion, whatever those bodies might be.
But are there still some rules in those?
Oh, there has to be, but the setting in motion of tasks, so the rules are within the tasks.
Well, that's actually what I was asking. Are you giving a set of rules?
Yeah, and I call the rules choreography.
Yeah, well,
So so that's, did you know?
But is there a freedom if it
Yes.
applies the rules, then you can use the rules sometimes with your own way.
But if you set in motion a spinning top,
Yeah.
the rule is that it spins around,
Exactly.
but we don't know where it's going to go.
Exactly.
So it's
Because
this,
it can be different kinds of rules
yeah.
And
later.
yeah, and part of the rules is to respond in real time with the system,
Exactly.
with the music
Yeah.
or with the
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that in itself
Yeah.
gives it that kind of fluidity and kind of elasticity.
In this kind of situation, the important thing actually is to be able to bind these different kinds of elements so that you can actually interact with them. It's not like reactive performance all the time, but it's also proactive. So you can do something to the other elements also. You can give them messages. Now I'm here, now do this.
The system reacts to the performers.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I find that then it's interactive. But both are active. Not just you or not just the other one, but both.
Then there's life.
Yeah.
You know, the liveness of it. Which is what I think is interesting about manipulating the technology live within the performance, is that it kind of gives the human element, which is the exciting element. Or when we think that the technology is being human, it's exciting. That's the point. That it has liveness, and so to make an offer, like an actor playing a character, the actor decides, has an impulse, and activates that impulse. So I think similarly, I'm beginning to think more of the technology as a character, the way we would use the word in dramatic terms, as opposed to a human being, because it's not. So the medium as a tool for being a character then means that the operators do have an emotional investment, and that desire that you were talking about of really just wanting to get in there makes a lot of sense in terms of wanting to build a relationship through the medium.
You want to communicate.
So the choreographer or the dancer is using the choreography, and the programmer is using the technology, and together, you know, they have the interaction, and this is where it makes sense to me in terms of the human desire to make meaning and relationships together through the medium.
Because I mean, the other way of working is, of course, taking total control. You're always in control. You control all the extensions of your body and whatnot there might be, and you're always in control. That's also one approach, but what I find is interesting is exactly the way that also the other part is doing decisions. And then I have to react to those decisions. And it's not only that I'm always in control, now you do that, and stay there.
And the decisions are part of the performance. Like it's an ongoing. I mean, what I love, I still think it's magical that we can do this. You know, there's that kid in me that goes, wow, magic and illusion, cool. So I really embrace that. I really embrace the idea of like, how can you, this is illusion we're creating here. So embrace it. It's like embracing cliches. Just embrace it fully and work with that illusion. How can you manipulate that illusion? How can you play off of it? How can you respond to it? Why is it there? So, you know, using your weight as a physical body in different ways, changing the quality of your body in relationship to this illusion, then creates an illusion for the audience that they can invest in. You know, they can really dive into that illusion and magic.
It's fun and interesting for you also to do. That's one of the key points here, because we're actually making art isn't all that serious thing, because it has to be fun, it's play. That's why, you know, in music it's like playing an instrument. It's playing, it's not a serious business.
It's like when you're talking about, you know, controlling every parameter and stuff, it's like you kind of know what you're going to get, and it's just not
and nobody finds that
interesting.
Audiences bore so quickly. It's like children, you know, when they know what you're going to do, when they know which hand it's in, it's like it's always in their hand. You know, okay, I want to play something different. You know, or whereas when there is this, that's why I think the human element is crucial, because it's like that we can have this chemistry, and that's what's watchable, you know, and hardly anything else needs to happen. You know,
it's interesting to us. I'm certain that trees interact also, and they're really interested to see how the other tree is growing, but for us it's a very slow process. So we're much more interested to our scale sort of happening, that it's related to
and not to be scared, because we live, I think the fact that we live in this culture now where everything is so fast, that we have, I said it already, that we have the desire to just fill up all the empty spaces, and And I think that takes away from just the patience that it takes to just allow this development, the relationship to develop, and allow it come to its own natural conclusion. And I think within this developing field of technology and live performance, that we have to be brave, you know, and allow ourselves to just wait and see what happens, you know, and not play too much with expectations, but more with the questions, with the play. See what happens, and allow maybe the dramaturgy to grow out of that.
And that's where the rules and the kind of basics of theatre come into play. Is really working with those things like that, you know, work. Dramatic pause. It works, you know, at the right place. A quick, fast change into something else entirely different. You know, those sorts of rules, theatrical rules, they completely apply to what it is that we're doing. So there's that. That's what I like. It's like we're really kind of digging our hands into the traditions that we and practices that we know work, and at the same time reaching in the other direction, going, I have no idea how this is going to work out, or what's going to, how long it's going to take, what color it's going to be, how it's going to sound. You know, I like that. We're kind of digging in both directions at the same time.
I think it all ties in as well to this ontology of how do we join up Eastern and Western ontologies? How do we allow our society, make space for us to take a year and a half to make a project, because that's how long it takes to make the code, and how do we think about changing the way that we make performance work to facilitate this.
That can also help the fact that there are a lot of approaches going on doing people, and they're sort of competing, and the technologies are competing, and they're letting you believe that they have something that's better than the others, and that they've done something that nobody else has done. In the theater, you don't, like, you're doing a production of Hamlet, you know, like, oh, Hamlet, yeah, we've done Hamlet already, so.
Tick, next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awful, yeah, we've done that. So we don't have it.
Although
Because the productions are different.
sometimes when they're doing the Hamlet every year, it would be interesting to see something else also.
Yeah, true, but still with the technology, just like we've done this with this sort of mapping thing, and so.
But it's the kind of a wow factor. It's like in magic. It's a trick first. It's a trick because I've never seen anything like that. But then it's like there are a lot of things to find in that certain process, and try to take it in really good use, and you know, find all the details and how can I put this to use in my other things and so forth. So it's not only the wow and then the next wow and then the next wow. So I think that's one of the key points, that you really have to study all of the aspects of the process. That okay, can I tweak that one? Can I do that? And what if I do this? How does it relate to the other things and so forth? So that's why it takes time to get a good use. To get it to good use.
It's like any art form though, eh? Like this dilettantism, and you're like getting this flush of creativity every day, and you're like, wow, I'm amazing. Or you can actually kind of create a framework through which we can look at this simple technology a new way, and a new way, and a new way, and have a deeper and evolving relationship with it until the point where the feedback we get from the technology has meaning enough that we can share. You know, I think that
there's almost going to be an 8-year-old in Taiwan who's coding some writing code that nobody else has done.
And it takes time to build a language that people are starting to understand. It's like, I mean, in music, when the piano developed the way that you could play in different keys, the first thing was that everybody was composing in lots of different keys all the time, because it was, wow, I can do this. But then it took a lot of time that people started to understand that this is just a part of the instrument. It's normal, nothing special. And then it sort of came back to this that now I'm really starting to think about the composition, not the wow factor, because I have to change keys all the time.
You change keys when it means something.
Yeah, it means something else again. But it is.
It's the same thing with with popular music. That I think for example for projection mapping, that we're sort of like in the situation that there's been Nirvana and everybody's playing Nevermind, and we're kind of like seeing, we're seeing sort of like the same Nevermind being played. I do it. I know I do it. I play with the same 4 notes or 3 notes. But there's like a huge possibility to go past it, but we have to first figure out,
You have to learn to play.
learn to play other than the 3 notes, and that takes time. What's the 4th note?
And you're probably going to mess it up first.
Yeah, but there's like big issues with space. For example, in projection mapping, it's how to use space in a even more fantastical or more spatial way. And then there's the graphic side. What do we see there?
Materials as well.
Materials. There's like whole tons of stuff that sort of like needs to be really examined and just used wildly to go from Nirvana to Radiohead. Just the next step that, okay, now we have something completely different. And then that will become, somebody will do it, and then
And that's the standard.
and then everybody will copy it for a while, and then somebody will do something new. And that's just how it works.
An awful lot can be done with 3 chords.
That's-
Best sounds in the world.
Yeah. But they do start, that's like a professional disease, is that I get a little bored when I see the same stuff all over again, even though the context is completely different. But because it does have a huge impact, for example, projection mapping in a scale like you do, it does have a huge impact on the performance. On the visual side, but also on concept level and on basically every level. So if the tools are the same, all the visuals are kind of like in the same vein as everything else, there's this sort of like, okay, I've kind of seen it, it's kind of new, but I kind of seen it, and when you see enough, it
I think
becomes...
that goes back to the dramaturgy though, and back to reframing. So as opposed to using the light as spectacle and going, wow, look, we can do mapping, rather than how do we apply this mapping within something else to make that something else, enhance that something else, or
It's
give it
also
something
about,
it doesn't have already.
It's more basic thing. I think it's for example about shapes, greens, lines, and rectangles. That's like projection mapping cliche. Basically, we've worked with it, so we know that it is. Or modeling, 3D modeling, and putting lights to circle around. There are these certain sort of like things that just they have
tropes.
They have this meaning outside of the piece. They have this cliche.
Arcane, was it? It goes back 40s, 50s, in the psychology of line and shape, and the psychology of contrast, and the psychology of colour, and all these theories and principles that are applied to Pixar layered artists use them, and hence why their 1.5 year of development process is so successful commercially, because they're tapping into emotive feelings on a massive global scale. Our universal connections go back to those lines, big, middle, and small. The principle of dividing the abstract canvas up into those truths, and way you look.
It's a natural way of liking those things.
I think we've got a massive tool here. A massive tool. It's going to take us forever to
But there's this sort of
explain
like,
it.
there's this, I think the projection mapping scene has very little knowledge of history. It's thought that it's, you know, from the early 2000s. But the history goes back to really far. And there's, for example, that you just said, there's like stuff that could be, should be really just read out and just brought into these things, and not just look at, you know, stuff that's been done in 2005, but stuff being done, you know, in 1905 or 1805. It's not just rejection, there's the same thing I think with lighting design and set design, and it's kind of like people just focus on what's going on now and reflect their own work within that scene, and really can't see what's being done like further back.
There's nothing here.
So that's real, that's part of your
nothing
project,
there.
isn't it? So reflect on things that are
Yeah, it's all
part of it, at least.
Historic.
That you in your project, in the PhD project, you will reflect on certain developments further back.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, if you want to talk about the history of projection mapping, or just the history of scenography in general, like, you can think about the Roman and Greek theatre, that they basically had frescoes. They painted frescoes onto the theatre wall. I mean, it was a slower process, or maybe not, but there is that history of, you know, of mapping the space, of, you know, creating the scenography on the architecture, you know, and developing these scenes. But actually, what I thought was really interesting, sorry to flip the conversation a little bit, but just to go back to this idea of the wow factor, and this idea of what you were saying about, you know, I've seen it, and I wonder, is there, you know, is there something about our culture that is kind of driving us to always want to see something new? And is that, to a certain extent, well, you know, to a certain extent, is that, well, to be, you know, provocative a little bit, is that kind of a little bit poisonous for us, you know, in what you said, instead of like really delving into the idea, it's like, okay, I've done that, let's move on, let's try and impress everybody with something, with a new trick, you know.
Yeah, but that's what I meant, that we need to sort of like go deeper with this tool, and with these, I think we're sort of like scratching the surface with this. For example, the graphics, if we just focus on the graphics, we're sort of like scratching the surface and kind of like not really exploring all the possibilities. There's like different, and they become cliched because we just see them so often, and there's so little stuff that goes on that's actually sort of like bringing something new, or something old, or something other than the kind of like the scene. I'm not, you know.
But yes, of course, because the cliches are like anchors. They're the I can relax here because I recognize this, and you have that in dance and theatre, of course, as well. And even as you were talking about how you divide and use the stage, there's been many choreographers who've written about that. And I mean, if I do this, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows this. Everybody knows Sparkly Jazz Hands. Like, it's been around for quite a long time. And I'm sure Bob Fosse did not actually make it up. That it probably existed before Bob Fosse. So, you know, those cliches, but I think that's a really necessary part of the longer term process of something anchoring.
It's definitely, you have to like go through that.
Identifying what it is that we're in, and then going, oh well, okay, we know that now. Now what else? What else?
But that's what I said, that there's this sort of like illusion of history that, illusion of that there is no history with this new technology. But there is, and sort of like people are kind of like coming into this thing and kind of like thinking that, okay, I want to whirl and go, and you have to go through all these things just to figure it out for yourself. It doesn't really help that somebody has figured it out already. Of course you have to go through it. But what I'm sort of like looking forward to and maybe trying to push a little bit is that, hey, we do have this history. Hey, let's take the jazz hands and bring them back and see what we can do with this technology and the jazz hands. You know?
I think it's more important than ever. I know from working with flamenco and starting to play with mapping and the possibilities, the necessity now for whenever I way into the future, whenever it gets right, is the discipline of the dancer and how necessary those steps and those movements and that quality, whether it's that type of dance or a martial art or whatever, hitting the same mark is so necessary for this. And in the way that without technology it communicates emotion. If we were to carry that emotion through this filter of technology, this filter of mapping, that we need to go back to that classical discipline and pay attention to those very precious things that we're starting to get lost in this first decade, I think. Press the button. I'm inspired here.
But it's an interesting aesthetic question also, because my boys, they don't like watching the old Disney movies because they look hand-drawn, like really obscure. It's not, they want solid shapes. And the new movies are exactly that. And I've been trying to sort of teach them that this is the previous generation. Hand-drawn. And so I'm just bullshit.
Yeah, whatever, Dad.
Okay. I feel like there's shaky images and obscure forms and
there's just this huge amount of information in the history. There's like tons of books that in graphic design and you know, film and scenography and theater. It's like this whole amount of just knowledge to be used and not just discarded that okay, it's not.
But only used knowledge.
Yeah, it's used knowledge, but it's
but not only used.
Yeah. For example, like we know that Kandinsky's line on a plane, or what was it? The basic book is so the graphic design of today is basically based on it, but still it's not sort of like discussed. It's not brought into the discussion. We just take it that okay, these lines and geometrical shapes they're fun. But we don't really see that where it comes from and what Kandinsky wrote about it. And he had this really, you know, profound, heavenly sort of like theories about what lines and shapes and colors mean. And those are sort of like really nice to get a grasp on.
But I think it's also like a kind of a social question, this thing that we have a tendency of describing things, making things understandable. And if there are new things, we don't understand them yet. But they're not understandable to us. And because we are the ones that are working with them, it's easier for us to start to understand. But then the audience, it takes a lot of time for the audience to get used to the new language, to the new way of doing things. So there's a lack of demand for new things as when you start thinking like resources and funding and getting paid. So I mean that's a bit of a problem also when you deal with new things. It's really hard to implement all the new things in the structures that are available. Let's say like institutions, theaters, opera, whatever. That they have certain ways that they work, which is economical for them. And once you start getting new things, or when hey, let's involve this technology and let's do that. And no time, sorry. Next one.
It's market driven.
Yeah, the problem is that they want new technologies that solve all their problems, but with those technologies you have to change the system. And so
that is very difficult. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah, and when you talk to a theater director that is sort of responsible for that year's results and money that comes in, then they don't want to take that risk that
We're changing everything, the whole fucking system.
Right on.
I'm just looking at the time, and it's 1:05.